Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is Jack, and in this video, I managed to survive 100 days in the post-apocalyptic survival game, The Long Dark. In case you didn't watch my last attempt, or you're just new to this game, I'll break it down for you. Your plane crashes in the Canadian wilderness during a geomagnetic storm, and you're left alone in the post-apocalyptic aftermath of the disaster. Survival is your only goal, and death is your only end. You can play in progressively more intense difficulties as a Voyager, Stalker, or Interloper, and be at risk of being attacked by hungry packs of wolves or territorial bears at any moment. Or, if you're like me and prefer a more relaxed playstyle and less jump scares, you can play as a pilgrim, allowing you to explore freely while being at peace with all the scary creatures. Animals will only attack if provoked, and you can focus more on the world around you rather than constantly looking over your shoulder. The mechanics aim for realism, and keeping an eye on your stats is crucial to survival. Everything counts in the beginning, but even as you progress and become more confident, you can never let yourself get too comfortable because Mother Nature can be cruel and unforgiving. If you die, that's it. You don't get a second chance and that world is lost forever. To switch things up a bit, I also downloaded a couple mods that made gameplay smoother but didn't have a big effect on the ease of the game, like a plugin that let me search containers faster and one that added shooting stars to the night sky. I'll link the site I got them from in the description if you're interested, but they didn't make a huge difference in the gameplay, just a few little tweaks that made the game more enjoyable for me personally. And now, without further ado, here is my survival story. I chose to start in a random location again, and the coincidence of where I spawned is so crazy to me. Spoilers for my last video, but I spawned in the same location that I died in last time on day 25. Kinda weird. I started out in the cannery worker residences in the Bleak Inlet region, an industrial wasteland ravaged by strong winds and packs of timberwolves. I looked around for a second before going into one of the cabins, as it was extremely cold out and I was gonna need a lot of supplies when starting out in a harsh region like this one. Most of the containers in the cabin were sadly empty, but there was still a little bit of food lying around that I grabbed. And then above the fireplace, I found a rifle. What an incredible start to a run. It would definitely slow me down a bit because it was pretty heavy, but it was worth it overall, because I now had a way to hunt for food and materials instead of relying on finding carcasses. I barely had any clothing though, and not a lot of food to last me, so back outside I was. I decided my best bet was to run along the road to find the actual cannery and hope there was stuff I could find to keep me warm, because there was no way I was going to survive a night unless I was either inside a building or had much better clothing. I found a ton of cars on the bridge and went through and looted them all, and then entered the cannery. There wasn't a lot of shelter, but I found a trailer that was definitely going to be the safest place to stay the night, and had some good boots and food in it. I fiddled around with the safe until I unlocked it and found a bit of fire starting supplies and spotted my first corpse, then a second, and then a third, all in the course of a minute, all who had nothing on them. If I was a smarter man, I might have taken that as a, hey buddy, maybe this is a dangerous place, but alas, I am not a smarter man. I found a pry bar and a hacksaw in one of the outer buildings, which was super useful as I could now harvest meat and open locked containers, and then found a coat that would be very warm after repairing it a bit. I hopped on the boat and didn't see much, but after crossing the docks, I found a couple who'd frozen to death together. It makes me sad every time I see it, but seeing corpses is also a reminder to be careful and not end up sharing their fate. I scaled the tops of some buildings as fast as I could. I was getting really cold, so I wanted to get back to the trailer as soon as possible. I didn't really have a safe way back to the ground until I finished crawling through the top floors of the buildings though, and my temperature was dropping fast. I found a bunch of clothing under a dock, and then the dreaded hypothermia set in. My bag was full and slowing me down, but thankfully I made it back to the trailer in time and breathed a sigh of relief. If I had been further into the 100 days, I definitely wouldn't have risked that, but I think because I had just started, I was feeling a little bit too brave. I spent the rest of the evening repairing and harvesting some of my clothes until I at last went to sleep. In the morning, instead of venturing on, I decided to break down some more clothes because my bag was way too heavy, but I didn't want to just waste them and leave them behind. I literally failed 4 times at repairing these socks and I wasted so much cloth, but I succeeded in the end. I basically spent the day doing that until it was too dark to continue and needed to rest. I woke up to a beautiful aurora in the middle of the night and watched it for a bit and then went back to sleep. The next day, it was finally time to venture on. I left the cannery and went in search of more shelters. I found some trailers and a hatchet, which meant I could now chop up logs and furniture for wood. After looting the trailers, I went out to continue my travels, but there was an intense blizzard, so I turned right back around. It was frustrating because I couldn't break pillows down for cloth since I didn't have a knife yet, and without cloth, I couldn't repair clothing, so I just had a nap and waited out. Later in the afternoon, it finally started to clear up a bit, and I followed a path to a trailer by the edge of the lake that had a book on gunsmithing that I could research for skill and a pastime. Since it was late, I decided to stay at that trailer and break down clothing and read that book until it was night. I woke up to a beautiful sunrise on day 4 and decided to venture out farther. I found a maple sapling and cut it down to use for crafting a bow in the future, and headed past the cannery and cabins to go to a bridge and lighthouse I saw in the distance on the first day. I stopped at a fishing hut on the way and found another rifle, so I dropped the first one I had that was in worse condition because carrying 2 would be way too heavy. Once I left the hut though, my energy was too low to risk running all the way to the lighthouse and back, so I went back to the cabins and rested for a bit first. But by the time I was rested, it was too stormy outside and too late in the day to go out, so I harvested more clothing and cleaned my rifle instead. A pretty cautious, repetitive first few days, but after the way my last attempt ended, I would much rather be safe than sorry. I woke up in the middle of the night to another aurora and got to see pretty Christmas lights, which was so cozy and fitting because I started filming this video a couple weeks before the holidays. The next day I set out very early for the lighthouse under another another pretty sunrise. The view from there was so nice that the lighthouse didn't have much, but it was at least a good lookout point. I found a hook in the fishing hut next to the lighthouse, so now I could craft a fishing tackle and have an easy food source. I came across a cave on the way back and ran into my first bear, and there were some creepy bones, but not much to loot, so I headed back to the cabin. I was too tired to do more adventuring, so I crafted a fishing tackle and went to the nearby fishing hut to fish since I was getting low on food. I caught a couple fish and then went inside to alternate between resting and cooking water and fish. In the morning, it was time to begin my venture out of the region after sorting through my bag. I walked for a long time before finding a cute cozy cabin and looting it, then decided to stay there and regain energy for the rest of the day and night, harvesting and repairing clothes. I woke up early and then it was out on the road again. I somehow got so incredibly turned around that I abandoned my original direction and found a secret mountain path. There was a corpse at the end of it, and I was starting to get really worried about being stuck without shelter as it got later in the evenings, so I did some dangerous mountain parkour to get down faster, then ran the only direction I could, to the cave that would lead me out of the region for good. Except as soon as I entered, I got lost in the cave as well, so I spent the night in it because I didn't know how long it would take for me to find a good shelter when I exited. When I woke up again, it was still dark and blizzarding outside, so I went back into the cave to pass time until it was less harsh out. But the second time I went out, it was so much worse. I had to pass time until it wasn't because I could not survive those temperatures, let alone navigate through that weather. Eventually, after going in and out of the cave half a dozen times, it cleared up at midday and I was able to start venturing out into the forlorn muskeg. After some walking, I finally found a lookout and realized where I was, and it was the complete opposite side of where I thought I was, so I'd have a long journey ahead of me to get out of this region and into a new one because I didn't feel ready to take this one on until I had warmer clothing and better supplies. But I'd be okay. I really wanted to harvest the deer I'd come across, and I knew I wouldn't be able to make it back to the cave before dark, so I decided to harvest the deer and then crawl into a hollowed out tree for the night and hope my supplies would be enough to keep me alive if the weather turned bad. I alternated between sleeping and cooking food and melting snow down into water. I slept as much as I could, checking the temperature every hour, and then I headed back in the direction I came from. I found a good old creepy balaclava and an area called the bunkhouses, where there was a gun research book and a Polaroid. I harvested another deer and then made it to the old Spence family homestead. I finally found a hunting knife in there, and there was a safe tucked behind some crates, but there was nothing great inside. There was a beautifully written note though laying on a bed in the loft area of the barn. My energy was almost fully drained, so as usual, I spent the rest of the day and night there alternating between repairing clothes and sleeping. Hey, 10% of the way through, let's go. I had to sleep in pretty late because I needed a lot of energy for how far I was going to have to travel before finding more shelter with how bare this region was, but then it was time to leave the broken down farmhouse behind. I rested for a little bit in a cave on the way, then came across part of a train wreck, which marked the halfway point in this region. Found a hunter's blind with a bit of supplies and spotted a ton of saplings which I could use to craft bows and arrows later, so I harvested them. My energy was so low that I then had to sleep out in the open for a second before going on, but I made it back and watched a beautiful sunset before going to sleep. And I got to watch a stunning aurora in the middle of the night as well. I woke up to extremely cold weather, and I was very thankful I did before I was too freezing to do anything but panic. I decided to hope for the best and keep running, but if it didn't start to clear up and warm up soon, I'd have to stop and make a fire, which was annoying. I managed to make it safely to a cave though, and followed it to see where it went, because I was so lost I didn't know anymore where I was headed. The cave looked so cool, if a bit eerie, and there was a deer carcass there, so since I was already low on energy, I spent the rest of the day harvesting it, cooking the meat, repairing clothes, and reading survival books. It was actually a pretty productive day, even if it was spent holed up in a cave. I dropped what I could before leaving, and then I headed out to find the exit of the cave. I came out of the cave and went further up to find a climbing area, where I climbed some small cliffs and made it out of the forlorn muskeg and entered the mountain town region. I found a destroyed cabin with a bit of supplies as well as a deer carcass, then continued on across the lake. I harvested more birch saplings and spotted a rope that would hopefully lead up to the town, so I slept under it for a bit to regain enough energy to climb. I had to temporarily leave a bunch of stuff at the bottom of the rope so my bag wasn't too heavy to climb, then rested in the cave for a bit to regain my energy, went back down to grab the rest of my stuff, then went back up to the cave to finally sleep for the rest of the night. In the morning, I ended up leaving a ton of food behind because I hoped the town would have lots of it to make up for leaving most of mine, and that way I wouldn't have to make 2 trips up and down the next rope like I did with the last one the day before. I got to the top of the second rope and found a deer carcass at the top that I harvested. I crested the hill and found my first glimpse of the town through a place called Paradise Meadows Farm. The farmhouse there had so much loot and was super cozy, and I was able to get a lot of water from the toilet so I wouldn't have to melt down snow for a while. You can't really afford to be picky in a situation like this. I dropped all of my curable materials like hides, guts, and saplings in the farmhouse to let them dry, because I could come back and get them when I needed to craft stuff once they were fully cured, and I left a lot of supplies in the desk drawer so I'd have a light bag for running around and looting all the buildings in the town. It was already late once I did all that, so I just explored the other structures around the farm before running back to the farmhouse to sleep in a proper comfy bed for the first time in days. I went out to explore the farm area and then headed up to the town. It was fun looting all the mailboxes in the bank, and I actually found some useful items in there. The Milton house was super cool as well and felt like somewhere I'd enjoy living in real life. I found some insanely good boots in the house, which was hype, and then spent the rest of the day harvesting and repairing clothing, once again. I woke up super early on day 15 and decided to start stockpiling my supplies in the bank since it was a good middle ground between the farmhouse and the town. I ran back to the farmhouse to grab some essentials to bring up to the bank so I'd have faster access to them, but I left all the other items there to cure since if I wanted to use them, the workbench was there anyway. I went around looting all the buildings in the area, looted the gas station, saw my first wolves in a long time there, broke down and repaired some clothing, then spent the night there. I left the station in the morning and ran up to one last cabin on the hill before returning to the bank to drop stuff off. I went back to the farmhouse to make some stuff out of the cured items because I so I didn't want to have to carry all that with me when I moved on to the next region, but some of the items I needed weren't fully cured yet, so I made some arrow shafts and read for the rest of the day to pass some time before sleeping. I spent the day crafting a bow as well as some fishing hooks, lines, and tackles, then went back inside to read more and pass more time for other items to cure. Most of the items I needed were cured when I woke up, so I spent the next 12 hours crafting some warm deerskin pants, since I still hadn't found any good pants while looting the houses. My temperature actually almost dropped down to freezing a few times while crafting due to a wild windstorm whiteout, but I finished crafting the pants and made it safely back to the farmhouse to sleep. I woke up and went back to the barn to craft the rest of my birch saplings into arrow shafts since there wasn't any other use for them and I didn't want to carry heavy saplings around, and then walked up to the bank to sort through all my supplies because I was planning to head north to explore a new treacherous region I'd never been in while playing this game. I read a book on fire starting to gain some skill and welcomed in day 20 while stargazing under an aurora. I started my trek when it was still dark out, getting to watch the pretty purple and green lights on the way. I checked out the inside of a church and it looked so eerie under the lights, then looted a trailer and found a cave that would take me through to the next region. If the weather on my first morning in Hushed River Valley was any indication of the average weather there, I knew I was gonna be in for a rough go. I tried to rest a bit more in the cave to see if it would clear up, but it didn't, so I decided to just go for it and venture out. I walked up to an overlook point to see if I could spot any shelters or signs of human life, but the area just looked completely barren. I found what I thought was a cave, but was just a little semi-sheltered area, then went further until I found a long rope climbing area. I made it up with one break and entered an ice cave. It was seriously sick. The ambience inside was so eerie and it almost made me feel the cold in real life. The lighting on the walls was so magical and the cave was massive, it seemed to just stretch on forever. I found a corpse deep in the cave, which was unsettling, and came across a rabbit that seemed to have sadly fallen to its death through a hole in the ceiling, but it would provide me with some food and materials, so I didn't have much time to feel bad before harvesting it. The cave was extremely difficult and nerve-wracking to navigate through, because it was way too easy to accidentally get lost, and I did get turned around a few times. I realized when I exited the cave that some smoke I had seen when I first entered the region was on the opposite side of the cave I had just ventured through, so in other words, I didn't need to go through it in the first place, but at least it was a pretty walk, even if it did waste a lot of the day. I got back through most of the cave before I fully ran out of energy and had to sleep in the open area. I read for a couple hours in the morning, then exited the cave and continued on my original path that I definitely should have stuck with in the first place. And I found the source of the smoke, a mysterious signal fire. There was some cooked moose meat on the leftover campfire, a snow shelter next to it, and then one of the best items in the game, a moose hide satchel. Wearing this bag allowed me to carry an extra 5 kilograms of weight, which is beyond helpful, and I was so ecstatic to have found it. I felt bad though for whoever had been there. They had so much supplies and were only recently alive, but as they had left all their belongings behind, I could only assume they had met an untimely end. Another reminder to not get too confident in this game because I was never truly safe. After I checked out the whole campsite, it was time to head back the way I came because there was an overpass with a bunch of birds flocked above it and I was curious to see what was there. I slept for a second before I found the tree bridge and oh my god, imagine crossing something like this in that kind of windy blizzard in real life? No thanks. The storm was so intense that I really couldn't see what was around me, so I huddled up in a corner and slept for an hour, and when I woke up it had totally cleared. It turned out the only thing up there was a deer carcass anyway, so I harvested it and began the long trek back to the cave that had originally taken me into this region. Not to leave already, but just to stay for the night, since my energy was low and it would take too long to look elsewhere. My energy fully drained before I made it though, so I downed an energy drink and made it back to the cave before dark and slept. I headed out early to take the left route from the cave, but got a bit too enthusiastic and managed to sprain my ankle and wrist slipping over a tiny edge. Luckily I had the supplies to deal with that. After a while of walking, I found a burnt out campfire with some supplies, but nothing too good, so I ended up just going back to the cave. I know it was only a short time to spend in the region, but getting around it required so much time spent traveling, and I really hoped to check out as many regions as I could before I reached 100 days. There also didn't really seem to be any structures to explore there, and I figured finding a region where there were would be more interesting to watch, so back to Mountain Town I went. It was only when I got all the way back to the bank that I realized I had dropped my rifle somewhere along the way and forgot to pick it back up on the way home. I had no idea where. I went back through my recordings and saw that I had dropped it in the mouth of the cave leading out of Mountain Town, just like I thought, so I had no idea how I missed it on the way back. I'm not sure if there was a glitch that caused it to despawn or just not be visible, since items are definitely not meant to do that on their own. It sucked, but there wasn't really anything I could do other than hope I found another rifle and more ammunition somewhere else, because I wasn't going to risk going all the way back up there if there was a chance that the rifle had actually despawned. I chilled in the Milton house while cooking the rest of the meat I had, since it was going to go bad soon, and then I went back to the bank and spent the rest of the day reading and organizing my items so I could head over to the next region in the morning. I was so glad I had found that moose hide satchel. It was going to be so handy in keeping me light while traveling. I left before first light because I had a long and tiring trek ahead of me, probably about a day's worth of travel. I found what looked like a ranger's office in a park area and some really warm boots, but they reduced my sprints so much that I just stuck with my current ones. I spotted the climbing area I was looking for and went down that rope, checked out a cave with a bit of supplies, then went up the next rope, crossing a tree bridge and following a river until I was leaving Mountain Town and entering a cave. Before I went out the other side of the cave, I napped for a bit because I drained my energy so fast while climbing, and then it was time to enter Mystery Lake. When I exited the cave, I saw a small barn with nothing in it, then went into the trapper's cabin on the hill, and it was so cozy with lots of loot. The first thing I found was a revolver, which was awesome. It wasn't as good as the rifle I had sadly lost, but it was something. There was also a snare, which I could use to catch rabbits without having to waste ammo or break my own heart shooting them. There was a note tucked under the couch as well that was beautifully written and so so melancholic. I played around with the safe until I unlocked it and got a bit of supplies in there too, then decided to head out and look for the lake area and hope I'd have enough energy to get me there. The region was so peaceful, with pretty deer roaming everywhere and very mild weather, or as mild as weather could get in a winter apocalypse. My energy fully drained before I was even close to where I wanted to be, so I had a nap for a bit in the middle of the clearing and then again after looting the train wreck area. The tower in the distance looked so pretty in the bluey-green evening light, but that serene view was quickly interrupted when I watched a wolf take down a deer for the first time. I felt bad, but I snuck in there and scared the wolf off because I needed the materials, and probably more than the wolf did. Not gonna lie, the standoff was terrifying, but he ended up giving in first, so it was fine. I made the painstakingly slow walk down to the cabin after harvesting the deer and promptly passed out for the night. I woke up early, and God, I love this cabin so much, it's so cute. I looted the whole building, found such a heartwarming, nostalgia-filled note upstairs that tugged at my soul, and then accidentally gave myself food poisoning from eating old peaches. Oops. I also realized I didn't have any wood, so I had to go out and cut some down, and then I spent the rest of the day cooking the deer meat and melting snow into water until I went to bed for the night. And at that, I had officially made it to 25% of the way through the challenge, and I had made it past the day I died on in my last attempt. Let's go. I sorted through my bag in the morning, then went out to explore the lake area. It felt so nice barely having to worry about the cold morning wind with all my warm clothes, but I also needed to remember how easy it was for that to change without warning, so I had to keep a watchful eye on my stats. I took the long trail behind the main cabin and circled around the lake, looting all the cabins as I went. I found a freaky note left in front of one of the cabins that thoroughly creeped me out, then continued on, checking out some of the fishing huts as well. I followed the river and found an area with a lot of rabbits, and even though it kills me every time, I put my snare down there over one of their paths, then slept for an hour there. When I woke up, I heard a rabbit dying, but it wasn't in my snare. There were suddenly 2 rabbit carcasses near me and no wolves to be seen. No complaints though, less work for me. I collected the carcasses and went back home to harvest them, dropped a bunch of hides and guts on the floor to cure, then went upstairs to sleep. When I went back to check on the snare, it was ruined just like in my last attempt. I found out later though that this is because if you leave snares out for a longer time, they're more likely to be ruined. It wasn't too big of a deal though, because I found a wolf snacking on another freshly killed rabbit and managed to win a standoff once again for the corpse. I got the shit scared out of me by another wolf though on my front porch, but made it home safely, and after dropping some stuff off, I figured I had enough energy and daylight left to go scout out the lookout tower I had seen. After a long run, I made it there with plenty of daylight to spare, and the tower looked sick. I looted it, did some reading, then went to bed, but woke up in the middle of the night to a crazy blizzard that was negative 40 Celsius when I stepped outside, even with all my warm clothing on, so I was very thankful to be able to go back into the warmth to sleep for the rest of the night. It was still storming when I woke up, so I read for a few hours until it cleared up, then continued exploring. I went back down to the train derailment and finally found another rifle. I was so excited. I left the rifle at the train wreck though to pick up on the way back and hoped it wouldn't disappear like the last one. I wandered past another part of the train and then came across a logging camp with a few trailers to go through and loot, and at last found some good work pants in one of them. I made it back home before dark and read for the rest of the evening. In the morning, it was back out to adventure to a frozen pond with a promising hunter's blind. Or at least that was the plan until I stepped out into this mess of a blizzard and decided, no thanks. So I read for a bit more until it cleared up to navigate. When I got to the pond, I found a single broken arrow, which was actually a great thing. I had been hoping to find arrows in a few locations now, but with no luck, and now that I had one, I could harvest it for the arrowhead and make a fresh arrow without having to go to a forge, which would have been a big hassle. There was nothing much else though, so I continued exploring the area. I found 2 corpses side by side outside a lone cabin, and a third one inside, which made me very curious as to what went down there. I then got extremely turned around on the way back, and didn't notice until I saw a bear and realized that meant I was near the trapper's cabin. I napped out in the open for a bit, and then headed in the right direction back to the cabin, making it home with fully drained energy. I harvested the arrow, went to sleep, and then woke up to an aurora a few hours later, which made the cabin look so freaking cool and cozy, but also eerie. But then something weird happened. I walked over to the laptop, and it looked like there was something on the screen, so I clicked it and I was actually able to see and download a log upload. That was so sick. I didn't know that was a thing you could do in this game. After checking that out, back to bed I went. In the morning, I repaired those work pants I found, then went down to start crafting arrows, until I had an oh my god, I'm an idiot moment. I realized that somehow I had left the bow I crafted all the way back in Mountain Town. My stomach sank, but there was no way I was going all the way back for it, so I'd have to make another. It was just super annoying because I hadn't bothered grabbing and curing any maple saplings since I thought I had the bow with me that whole time, so I'd have to start the process from scratch. So back out I went to find a maple sapling. I managed to sprain my wrist again going down a hill, and then a second time before finally finding a single maple sapling and making it back home with just a tiny bit of energy to spare. The sapling would take 6 full days to cure, so I would either have to pass a lot of time crafting and reading, or just take it with me to the next location and craft the bow while I was there. While I waited though, I sat down at the workbench and crafted the rabbit skin hat that I had wanted, and I was looking warm and absolutely horrifying. I went back to the workbench in the morning to craft some arrow shafts, even though I wouldn't have a use for them until I was able to craft a bow, but they were lighter to carry around than the actual saplings, so it was worth it. I crafted some fishing tackles as well, because why not? It was a good way to pass time. Then I spent the rest of the day reading so I'd have less heavy books to carry with me when I left. I finished reading all my books in the morning, then realized I really had nothing to do to pass the time for 6 days, so I decided I may as well start my journey to the next region since there was still a lot to explore in Mystery Lake on the way out. So after one last look at my cozy cabin, I began to make my way east. I checked out another hunter's blind on the way and found an intact arrow, which was great because it was less for me to craft later. Then I made it to the Carter Hydro Dam and checked out the trailers outside first before heading into the main building. However, I wouldn't be going down to the very bottom floor of the dam because if all went according to plan and I was able to survive long enough, I'd be coming back this way because it was a route to the other upper regions, so I'd just check out the bottom floors then. For some reason, the dam always feels so creepy to me. It gives me a bit of Chernobyl vibes, the abandoned haunting feeling. I finished checking out the dam and then went to sleep at the entrance for the night. I read in the morning until it was light out, then back out I went to continue on my journey to the next region. The ravine was pretty scary to navigate through with the tree bridge and eerie train wreck. I decided to nap in the collapsed tunnel because my energy was low and I didn't know when I'd next find shelter, and then I stepped up to see what I was dealing with. It was not ideal. I was so high up on this bridge with no chance of surviving if I slipped, and the awful creaking noises just made it so much more nerve-wracking. But holy hell, nothing compared to how on edge I was crossing those thin fractured sections of the rails at the end. I don't think I'd ever been so tense while playing this game as I was then. I made it safely across with my stomach only falling through my ass a few times, and breathed the biggest sigh of relief before leaving the ravine and crossing through into the coastal highway region. I followed the rails until I found a little trailer to chill in and spent the rest of the evening cleaning and repairing my rifle before going to bed, excited for the exploration ahead of me. I got an early start and headed out with a beautiful sunrise overhead. The region seemed pretty and peaceful so far, if not a bit barren, but I was sure I'd find more stuff around. I found another trailer pretty quickly, and then a cute cozy cabin nearby, and the views were so breathtaking I felt like if I could choose any of the regions to live in permanently, it would be this one. I made it to a fishing camp with 4 cabins and found so much useful stuff just on the outside of the first one, not to mention how pretty the campsite was. I was really loving this region. I checked out all the cabins, then went to scout out the island in the distance. Walking next to the sea and hearing the waves lapping at the ice was so calming, and I could almost taste the fresh sea air and imagine the seagulls squawking. You know, if everything wasn't completely frozen over. At last, I made it to Jackrabbit Island, which I thought was a teeny bit humorous given my name, and found the coziest cabin yet with a stunning view. Whoever lived here before the apocalypse was one lucky lad. My energy was too low to make it back to the cabins before I passed out, so I stayed in that one for the night. I headed out to see what the birds were causing a commotion about, and I have no idea how I didn't sprain anything while scaling this cliffside. There was a corpse at the bottom, but they didn't really have anything I needed, so I rounded the island to go see what the other birds were squawking about, and it was just another corpse, so onwards I went. It was a beautiful morning with lots of deer out and about, and the pretty sights made the long run across the ice to the next buildings less painful. I had to be really careful on the ice to not walk over deeper blue areas though, because there was a big chance I could crack the ice and fall through, and a not as big chance I could survive that, so I had to weave around on the lighter shallow areas to get to land. I made it to a log sorting area with a cabin and a trailer, but there wasn't much in either of them aside from food, which I had way too much of. I was going to continue on, but I ended up finding a deer carcass and harvest it because I needed guts since I accidentally left mine behind in Mystery Lake, and by then my energy was too low to make it to the next shelter, so I went back to the trailer to read and spend the night. I woke up in the middle of the night to an aurora, which looked so cool with all the streetlights, then went back to sleep. I got up pretty early and continued following the road, and found what I thought was a little house nestled into the rock until I got closer and realized it was the entrance to a mine. Not sure why I went in, because as soon as I did and saw the darkness, I immediately turned back around. I was not ready for that, I had more plans. I kept walking until I made it to a little town area, which was exciting because I hadn't been in one since I left the mountain town region. I finally found some really good inner layer pants in the first cabin instead of the basic thermal ones I'd been wearing, and there was a whole gas station filled with way more food than I knew what to do with. Inside I found a hacksaw and another arrowhead, and there was a note on the desk that spoke of people getting paranoid around the beginning of the apocalypse, which was interesting to read. I explored all the houses in the town, and I was so thankful wolves weren't something I had to worry about, because with the amount in this town, trying to sneak around would have been terrifying. No wonder it was abandoned. I went back to the gas station after I'd gone into all the houses, repaired some clothes, and read until it was time to sleep. Not before giving myself food poisoning though, for a second time, of course. I had a big day of travel ahead of me once again. While there was still a lot to explore in the mountainous areas of this region, I was currently much closer to the next region, and when I was done exploring there, I'd have to come back through this area anyway, so I figured I'd check everything else out here on my way back. With that, it was time to venture out to one of the more harsh regions in the game, Desolation Point. The name really says it all, doesn't it? I organized my bag so I wouldn't be carrying so much stuff for the long run I had, then headed out with my fingers crossed that this wouldn't be the day my journey was cut short. The 50-day mark was so close I could almost taste it. I found a couple waterfront cottages that had some good clothes in them, and then kept moving along until I reached the old island connector, also called the Crumbling Highway. The first thing I heard were ocean waves crashing against the shore, which again was such a peaceful sound despite the cold. Some cawing birds led me to a deer carcass I harvested, and then just up ahead there were some abandoned, destroyed buildings. My energy was low and I was worried I might not be able to find shelter for a long while, until I saw a hatch on the ground and was able to find a basement, which was so cool. I napped in the basement for a couple hours so I'd have enough energy to get get to the next sheltered area, and when I came back up, I saw a wolf take down a rabbit and immediately stole it from him. Sorry, pal. I harvested another deer carcass, then went into the cave next to it to spend the night. I dropped some items there, repaired some combat pants I found, and now my fit was looking quite fresh. Onwards to the end of the road, or so I thought until I stepped outside and it was once again a negative 30 Celsius windstorm. So I read and napped for a bit in hopes of it passing, but this was the most stubborn storm yet and didn't clear up until just before nightfall. I was nervous about traveling at night, but I wanted to at least try to make it to the next cave before it was fully dark out, so I wouldn't be wasting time the next morning now that I'd lost a day hiding from the storm. I made it with plenty of time to spare and lit my storm lantern to begin navigating through this creepy looking cave system. It was super off-putting and felt like something out of an apocalypse movie, which I guess was fitting. I found the other end of the cave and it was pretty unnerving setting up camp at the mouth of it with all the darkness behind me, but I did and spent the night alternating between sleeping, reading, and repairing clothes. To my disappointment, when I woke up, I could hear a raging windstorm even from the safety of the cave. I stepped out to check and my suspicions were confirmed, although it wasn't as bad as I expected, and because I didn't want to waste yet another day hiding out, I decided to risk it and start exploring and hope I'd find shelter nearby if the storm got worse. I found such a cool looking abandoned stone church, and across the water there was another lighthouse. It looked like there was so much to explore here and I was excited. I left my rifle in the trunk of a car outside the church so I could get around faster and come back for it on my way out, and as I continued on, I even found a ship peeking out from between two rocks that I definitely have to go and check out when it didn't seem like the storm was picking up. I headed towards a huge structure in the distance, and the first thing I saw there was a bear. I wanted to see how close I could get to it so I could watch it, but it ended up getting spooked, and I'm not gonna lie, it was really hard trying not to laugh at the bear's absolute panic trying to get away while getting stuck on items. It managed to escape in the end though. I found some stuff in a trailer and then found a door that led me into the whale processing center. All the holes in the floor were pretty unsettling and made me very careful because I didn't feel like falling through and either breaking my legs or getting stuck. I know I literally just said this was a processing center, but apparently my brain lacks one of those because it took a minute for my brain to catch up and realize that there was in fact a massive whale carcass in the building and a few outside as well. I found some connected trailers to stay in for the evening, then harvested and repaired clothing until I slept. I woke up the next morning to an incredibly vibrant and blinding sunrise, and since the weather was very clear, I decided today would be the day I checked out that shipwreck I saw. It looked so sick up close, weathered and rusted from the wind and lack of maintenance. There was a forge on the bottom floor which meant I could finally craft arrowheads and make arrows, and the bunk area looked so creepy yet cozy. Walking around on the deck of the ship was such a strange feeling, especially with how tilted it was. It was a very lonely setting, and made the feeling of being so alone really sink in. I went back down and decided to try to use the forge. First I had to start a fire in it, then add coal to the fire until it got hot enough, 150 degrees Celsius to be exact, to craft things. I spent the whole day and a bit of the night in the forge until I had crafted a solid 23 arrowheads, hoping I'd never need to come all the way back over here to the forge, and then went to sleep in the ship. The last place I wanted to check out in this region was the lighthouse, so it was time for an early morning jog. The view from the base of the lighthouse was so stunning, and with clear skies I could see most of the region from it. But the inside of the lighthouse was even better. It looked so snug and felt so safe, and there were some cool little hideaways for storing supplies in that I almost missed. But if I thought the view from the bottom was amazing, it was nothing compared to the view I had while standing at the top. It was such an isolating and humbling feeling to look out over the whole region like that, a reminder of how small I was in comparison to the rest of the world. But to me, it was a beautiful, symbolic kind of solitude. I headed back down and found a revolver tucked behind a pillow that I missed earlier, but I didn't grab it since I already had one, and if I ever ended up needing it, I could just make the trek back. Tomorrow's journey would be a familiar trek. I was returning to Coastal Highway, having explored everything I could in this region. I headed out early, ignoring the heavy falling snow, and made my way back to the road to follow it to the cave once again, grabbing my rifle when I passed the car I left it in. I found a wolf digging into a freshly killed deer, and for once I was going to let it be because I didn't need any materials from it, but this wolf scared so easily. I made it to the cave, and by the time I got through to the other side, my energy was almost fully gone, so I napped for a bit before continuing on. I ran back to the basement and stayed there for the night, reading and sleeping. I made it back to Coastal Highway early in the morning, and went back to the town to grab my stuff from the gas station. I finally had everything I needed to craft another bow, so I did that, and then crafted a bunch of arrows as well until it got dark. I went back to crafting arrows as soon as I woke up, and spent the whole day doing that again. I woke up in the middle of the night to an aurora, and was able to get on the computer and download another buffer memory, which is still so cool to me. This one spoke of ships passing by the area heading south in search of warmer areas, another glimpse into the beginning of the apocalypse. I crafted the last of the arrows in the morning, and then it was time to organize my supplies and head out of the region to explore new lands. I found some cabins while heading north and got jump scared by a corpse in one of them, which was fun. You can really never let your guard down in this game. I left all my guns and ammo in one of the cabins because it would make my journey much quicker, and I had my bow now, so I hoped I would need them anytime soon. I made it up to a lookout that had another rifle in it and the most hopeless note yet. The words and half-written stories in these notes always feel so emotional to me and leave my heart either feeling warm nostalgia or icy despair. The view from the tower was beautiful, but I needed to keep moving. I made it to the caves before dark and got lost a couple times before finding the exit and sleeping there for the night. I took my first steps into Pleasant Valley, following a trail until I found a road, the the only one that runs through this region. I followed it and got my first glimpse of the town and crossed a bridge to get into it. There was another gas station like in Coastal Highway that was stacked with food, but I didn't need most of it since I had so many MREs, so I kept moving along. I found a town hall, and the sign in front of it felt so out of place in a town that had clearly been abandoned for some time, but the inside was super cozy and had lots of useful supplies. I went around looting the rest of the cabins in the town, and there was a big church as well, with not much in it, but I decided to spend the rest of the day reading there. I got an early start and followed a long snowy trail until I came across a farm. In the barn there was a note with instructions on growing plants, and the inside looked neat, but there wasn't much else. So far this region looked cool and there were lots of buildings to explore, but not many useful items. I wasn't sure if that meant I was getting really comfortable and stonked in this game, or if it was just a barren region. I wandered through a birch forest and found some abandoned storage buildings, then got really up close and personal with a bear for fun while I ran back to the road. I followed the road until I found what seemed to be the main living area of the region, the Pleasant Valley Farmstead. There was a hatch that took me to a basement with some supplies, and upstairs I found a note with instructions on how to make bread. I looted the house, then read for the rest of the day and slept. I woke up to an aurora as well and saw some lights on the mountain in the distance. I went over to the barn next to the farmhouse, but there wasn't much in it, so I continued on my way to the radio tower I had seen lit up during the aurora. There was a radio control hut next to the tower that had a lot of food and clothing and other supplies in it, and it looked awesome. I spent the rest of the day there reading since my energy was too low to continue exploring. Day 50, the halfway point. I made it. It felt crazy to have gotten this far, but also crazy to think of how much more time was still ahead of me. There was no time to celebrate though, too much to do and explore. I sprained my ankle on the way back downhill, so not a great start to day 50 and hopefully not a sign of things to come. I got another close up with a bear, then followed the river until I found a broken up shed with lots of good stuff in it. Some research books, a snare, some ammo. I spotted another rundown cabin further up the river, and then followed a tree bridge up to a cave and spent the night there. I went out early, and when I rounded the corner of the cave, I found a plane crash. It looked absolutely insane. Suitcases scattered everywhere, blood on the snow, corpses laying around. It didn't look like a fun situation to be in, and I assumed the crash happened due to the geomagnetic storm. I went around looting the suitcases for clothes, and also found a ton of airline food, which was sick. Being able to walk around on the plane was so cool as well, if not a bit nauseating from the slant of the floor. Like the ship in Desolation Point, it just felt so unlike all the other structures in the game. It was so unique and interesting to go through. I went back to the cave since the plane was a dead end, dropped a bunch of stuff there, and then went back down the way I came. I found a wrecked cabin, but it had a basement with some food, and even though I wanted to keep going, I decided to spend the night because it seemed like it would be a while before I was able to find more shelter, so I read until it was dark. I was all ready to get an early start and continue on, except when I left the basement there was another insanely freezing blizzard, and that changed my mind pretty quick. I read inside a bit more in hopes the storm would clear, and it sorta did, not fully, but I didn't want to waste a full day stuck inside again, so I started my long walk to the next region's transition zone. I had to nap a bit underneath a rope and climbed up and slept out in the open in a ravine after watching a super vibrant, pretty sunset. I headed out to a beautiful sunrise and entered the region of Timberwolf Mountain. I got deja vu from Pleasant Valley as I immediately found another plane crash, or at least parts of it, and followed the parts to a lake where there was a super cool stone cabin. A note on the table inside was a diary entry from a climber who was seemingly there for a climbing trip when the apocalypse first hit. I was very happy to find this shelter, as I assumed there wouldn't be much more, or any more at all in this region, since it was one of the more difficult ones, so I was definitely going to stay close until I had a better feel for the weather in this new area. Or at least that's what I thought, until curiosity got the better of me, and I told myself I could just explore a little bit further before night, which led to me discovering more of the plane, and along with it some supply containers that were so full of food and medical gear and lantern fuel. After that, I found a cave and decided to stay there for the night instead of heading all the way back to the cabin, since I assumed the cave would keep me just as warm. I dropped a bunch of stuff in the cave that I could come back for if I needed, then continued on. I found a tiny path between a bunch of rocks, and there was a corpse there. Next to that was a path that took me into a super dark, creepy ravine. I followed it until I got to the mouth of a cave that was so pitch black, it took a bit of willpower to go in, but I did and entered the Ash Canyon region. Again, I still had lots to explore on Timberwolf Mountain, but with how the regions were connected, I'd be able to explore everything I had missed on the way back after going through Ash Canyon. This new region looked like something out of an evil fairy tale. The burnt forests and darkness even during the day was so unsettling. After wandering through the woods, I stumbled across a cabin that was just as desolate and deserted as everything else seemed to be in the area, and even the fishing hut on the marsh was destroyed. Trying to find landmarks was near impossible with the intense whiteout, which only added to the spookiness of the area. I found a place to squeeze behind two waterfalls and slept in a little overhang there for a couple hours, and then was so surprised when I rounded a corner and actually found a fully intact cabin. I eagerly went in, happy to finally find something man-made and familiar, but inside the place was a wreck, and there was a vaguely threatening note left on a shelf. I spent the rest of the evening there reading and then slept. I was all ready for an early start until I stepped out and the weather was as terrifying as the region, so back inside I went to pass time by melting and boiling water and repairing clothes. It was a little better when I went out a couple hours later, so I decided to brave it and continue on. I sprained an ankle once again, my poor bones. As I was heading uphill, I noticed what looked like a horrifyingly long suspension bridge and hoped with everything in me that I would not have to cross in the future. Going behind the waterfall was actually so sick, and I had to scale a little climbing area to get to the next ledge, where I found a cave and went in. I wasn't sure if this was some sort of trap on a naive explorer like myself, myself, but there was a smaller waterfall that seemed to be beckoning me to run through it, so I did. It unsurprisingly immediately gave me hypothermia, as walking through a freezing sheet of water should, and my clothes were soaked, which made me realize I definitely should have taken them off before crossing through, but what's done was done, so I continued on and hoped I wouldn't take too long to dry off and warm up. If my clothes didn't dry off on their own though, I'd have to make a fire to dry them myself, or they'd be basically useless out in the cold. I found a deer carcass underneath a rope I climbed to get to the next ledge. By the time I made it to the exit, my clothes were not dry, so I had to make a fire and rest by it for a little bit. I didn't dry off fully, but I didn't want to waste more daylight or firewood, so I continued on. As soon as I left the cave, the first thing I saw was a bridge, and I just knew I was gonna have to cross that mammoth of a bridge I had seen earlier, so I gritted my teeth and kept going. Sure enough, there it was, and oh my god did I clench booking it over that gap. Why was that there? It felt like a personal attack, honestly, but I did not have much time to think about it because I was just focused on getting the heck across that cursed bridge. Except, as if that wasn't bad enough, the bridge started swaying as I was crossing it, and I was convinced that was it for me. My life flashed before my eyes multiple times by the time I made it safely to the other side, and I breathed a sigh of relief, just glad it was over with. Or so I thought, until I rounded the corner and my sad eyes fell on yet another bridge. I took another deep breath, braced every bone in my body, and ran for my life. The creaking was just the worst, but hey, at the end I was rewarded with a glitched floating pack of matches. You don't see that every day. Then there was more climbing and overhangs to crawl under until I finally stopped at a cave for the night. I had a nice view of a mining camp in the morning and scaled my way down a long climbing rope before promptly realizing that I had messed up and was not in fact meant to go down there, so I got to climb all the way back up. And holy shit, the heart attack I had when I started to feel like I wouldn't have enough stamina to climb back up to the ledge. My heart was pounding and I was genuinely convinced that was about to be the end of my 100 days attempt, but thankfully I made it with the tiniest bit of energy left to spare and then kept going again until I got to the top. I wasn't sure how I was supposed to get down to the mining camp until I found a tiny little footpath that was so steep it was almost vertical and sprained both my ankles and my wrist on the way down, but I survived, which was what counts. The camp looked so cool and I followed the rails into a small mine shaft opening. I had to walk through a lot of water, which was bad news for my shoes that had just finally finished drying, but it was beyond worth it because of the stuff I found. There was a pair of crampons, which meant I'd lose less stamina while climbing and I'd get sprains less frequently, and I also found some snow pants which had amazing stats, and a technical backpack. I didn't know that this existed, but when I realized what it did, I was so freaking hype. It added another 5 kilograms of carrying space to my bag. That basically meant with my well-fed boost, moose hide satchel, and backpack, I had doubled my carrying space since I started out, which was a huge game changer. I also found a page from a diary detailing some adventures, and then the corpse I presumed it belonged to. There was a rifle as well, but I didn't really need it at the moment since I had my bow, so I left that for me to come back to if I ended up needing it someday. I slept in the already made bed there for a couple hours to regain some energy, and then carried on. When I got to the exit of the cave, it was only midday, but my energy was so low, I ended up staying there and reading until it was night. I went out super early and had to climb down some small ledges, then had to scale down yet another long rope. I could hear the metallic clanking of the crampons at work though, and my stamina was definitely depleting less quickly. I slept in a snow shelter I found at the bottom of the rope for a tiny bit to get some of my energy back, and in hopes that the nearly blinding whiteout would dissipate, but it wasn't budging, so I had to keep moving. I climbed down another rope and then really could not see shit, so I hugged the edge of the rock for a long time, too scared of getting hopelessly lost in the whiteout, until I finally got to a cave that would take me back through to Timberwolf Mountain. I got lost a couple times in the cave, found a corpse and some supplies, but eventually made it out, and god was the blinding sunlight bouncing off the snow ever a welcome sight after being stuck in that dark, eerie region of Ash Canyon for so long. For how nervous I was coming into Timberwolf Mountain at first, it was funny how calm and non-threatening it felt after being in Ash Canyon for a few days, but I was still careful not to let my guard down. With low energy and not a lot of daylight left, I went back into the cave for the night. I got another early start and found some more containers from the airplane wreck as soon as I headed out. The first container had a ton of cured hides in it, which was so useful, and the second had kits and other tools for repairs. Before I could go on though, an intense blizzard started, and I honestly freaked out a little bit because I was so turned around and I wasn't able to find the cave again before it got too snowy and windy to see, so I huddled up in a corner in my bedroll and hoped for the best. If I had to, I could make a fire, but having to resort to that felt like admitting that I was in a very serious situation, so I was still hoping it would pass. Thankfully, after a few hours of crawling to different corners to sleep and avoid the wind, it did clear up. I had had too many close calls recently, and they were all very scary reminders of how fast things could come to an end. I went back to the containers I was at and found another on top of the rock next to them, which had a bunch of clothes I didn't really need this far into the game. I hugged the rock wall again for a while, and after getting turned around a few times, made it to another rope that I climbed up and entered yet another cave. I navigated through it, and by then it was late, so it was time to read and spend the night. When I went out in the morning, it was blizzarding again, so I read for a bit before continuing. I climbed another rope that led me to the very summit of Timberwolf Mountain, and when I rounded the corner, I saw the tail section of the plane. It looked so unstable and scary on the edge of the mountain like that, but I stepped in and was speechless at the amount of containers there were to loot in there. I couldn't even fathom that amount of supplies, but I got to work with my hacksaw going through every single one and grabbing whatever useful gear I could. I got more MREs than I could ever possibly need, and though they were heavy, they'd keep me going for a lot longer than any other food could. One of the containers had an insane amount of tools in it, and I wished I could take them all with me. I even found a cured wolf hide in one of the containers, which was insane, and there were some clothing items I had never even seen or heard of in this game, but they were infinitely better than what I currently had on. I sorted through all the items I had found, leaving a ton behind, as painful as it was, then headed back to a cave next to the rope to read and spend the night. I climbed the rope all the way back down from the summit, grabbed a rope I'd need for a future descent, then had to leave some stuff at the top of another climbing point before climbing down. I ran to deploy my rope at the other anchor spot, checked a container, then went back to the last rope to climb back up, grab my stuff, and climb back down. There was a lot of back and forth and napping in between, but I finally made it down and dragged my feet into a cave by dark. Navigating through the cave was such a pain. It felt like there were endless directions to go in, and I had to turn around more than a few times, but I managed to find my way to the exit and slept next to it for the night. I left the cave in the morning and entered Black Rock, my first time ever in this region. It wasn't the most exciting start though, as there was a strong whiteout and I had to read for a couple hours while I waited for it to clear up, but then it was time to explore. I climbed down a ledge, then pretty quickly found an actual road, the first one I'd seen in ages, and followed it until I found a small trailer and a clear cut. I grabbed some food and a research book from inside, then kept following the road. I found a sign that said prison area and had a warning to not pick up hitchhikers, which was a bit unnerving, but I was also excited to see what it would mean for this region. I came across a farm with a good amount of supplies in the barn, then continued on the road. The trucks I found had Black Rock labeled on them, so I assumed they belonged to some sort of security guards. There was another sign pointing me in the direction of a penitentiary, and another warning sign next to an abandoned truck. A long walk of empty road later, and the biggest structure at last came into view. I was awestruck. It looked incredible and imposing and scary. A big sign welcomed, or rather cautioned me, and I definitely was not authorized personnel, but I was going to enter regardless. I was surprised how easily I was able to enter the prison. I know I'm in an apocalypse, but I expected more of a struggle or search for a way in. No complaints here though. I left the entry area and stepped out into a huge prison yard. A wolf roamed around it, and there was a sign directing me to different areas, so I decided to go to the direction most arrows pointed. I tried to enter the infirmary, but the door was locked, so I guess I spoke too soon about not having to hunt for ways in. That was okay though, because there was a door right next to the infirmary that led to a stairwell, so I checked that out instead. It led me to an area with a few cells and a doctor's office type of area, which had a lot of food and meds laying around, but not much else, so back down I went. It honestly kinda spooked me how the doors were closing on their own. I found a locked double door with a note tucked behind the keypad that gave me a hint as to where the code would be, I assumed. I was able to enter the boiler room, which was dark and creepy and had damaged burst pipes everywhere. I decided it did not seem like it would be a fun place to be if an aurora were to happen, with the wires laying around everywhere that could possibly light up. The tunnels the room led to seemed to go on forever, and I thought they might be taking me out of the prison, so because I ironically didn't want to escape yet, I decided to turn back around and keep exploring the prison first. I made my way back up after a slow, low energy walk. I could have slept in there, but I didn't want to risk getting stuck around all those shock hazards in case an aurora began while I was sleeping, so I went into a prison transport bus and decided to sleep there for the night. At least until I was woken up by an aurora, and oh my god was I glad I hadn't stayed in the boiler tunnels. I went out to explore the yard under the lights of the sky and the actual lamplights, and it was so insanely pretty. I got to see the wolf up close as well, which was sick and slightly spooky. I was planning on waiting until morning to explore the actual prison, but I figured it'd be wrong to turn down the chance to explore it with electricity running, so I got all excited to go in, only to realize it was very much blocked off. That was a bummer, but I decided to sleep it off and look for another way in the morning. I set out to walk around the perimeter to try and find an easy way in, even though I knew it'd probably be more difficult than that. It just looked like there wasn't really any way in, even from a quick scan, so I knew I'd actually have to put the work in, and I referred back to the note I found outside the double doors. This M person said to meet them at a mine, and that they had a lead to the code on the door, so I just had to figure out where that mine was. The ones I had passed on my way to the prison were just smaller caves, so I decided to follow the river, except that was a dead end, so I had to backtrack all the way to the road instead and follow it in the opposite direction I came from. After a long while of walking, I started to see signs pointing me to a mine, so I knew I must be going in the right direction. I found a cabin with the door kicked down and not much in it, but since my energy was low, I spent the rest of the day there reading and repairing clothes and slept there for the night after watching a bright pink sunset. I followed the road until I spotted a little hunter's blind. It had a Polaroid inside as well as a rifle, but I again didn't need it at the moment, so I left it. I kept following the road and found a pack of Timberwolves, again making me very thankful I wasn't playing in stalker mode this time, and the signs pointing me towards the mine were becoming more frequent. I found a freshly killed deer and decided that was too good to pass up, so I quartered it and took it with me to harvest and cook later once I was out of the cold wind. I made it up to a chain link fence and thought I was finally at the mine, but when I got to the bridge I assumed would take me in, it was broken. Of course, it couldn't have been that easy. I was now carrying heavy deer meat, it was super cold, and my energy was halved, but I didn't want to backtrack all the way to a smaller cave to stay in, so I decided to look around and see how I was meant to get over there. The whiteout and winds began to get too bad though, so I found a sheltered area near the bridge and slept there for a bit to try and wait the bad weather out. My plan backfired as the wind shifted directions while I was sleeping, and my temperature began depleting quick, so I had no choice but to get up and try to find somewhere else to shelter. I ended up getting so turned around and had to backtrack to find the cave anyway, and by that time the storm had cleared up, but it was almost nighttime, so I spent the night harvesting and cooking the deer meat and sleeping. I read for a bit in the morning, and then it was time to go look for a way into the mine. I found a rope that dropped down onto the frozen river, and I thought maybe if I followed it I'd find a road branching off that could get me to the other side, since I clearly couldn't enter the mine from the side I had come from, so I climbed down. I followed the river until I saw 2 long climbing ropes leading up out of it, but I already had low energy from climbing the first one, and napping wouldn't be enough to get full energy to climb both both ropes, so I decided to spend the rest of the day in the cave next to the ropes reading. I got an early start and climbed both ropes, then found a cave at the top I had to sleep in for a bit to regain my fully empty energy before continuing on. I walked through a long ravine until finally spotting a little mining area and the opening to the mines and went in. It looked so sick inside and so different from all the other caves in this game. I blindly chose a direction and started walking, and found an area where I had to walk over some water, and that's when I had the most stomach sinking moment. I wasn't fully paying attention and slipped off the edge into the water and was straight up stuck. I was gonna put my bedroll down to see if I could unglitch myself by sleeping in it, but then I finally remembered the crouch button existed. And at first it seemed like I was still stuck, but I managed to find a way around at the cost of my feet freezing, and I was so relieved. There's a good reminder to not let myself get distracted while playing this game, jeez. I kept going and experienced what sounded like a small earthquake, which was really unsettling, no pun intended, and found an elevator as well as an elevator crank. I got in and started turning the crank and went all the way down to the 3rd floor, which was weird because I didn't see a 2nd floor, but I assumed there'd be another way to get there. There were a bunch of burst pipes spraying out what I hoped was just water, and a lot of signs telling me to keep out, but I didn't, obviously. I kept getting disrupted by the cave shaking and could only hope it wouldn't crumble around me, and found a backpack with a really good sweater in it, then put my bed down to sleep. I got going again and took the direction I didn't go in last time to see if I'd find another way to the 2nd floor, and there was weird green gas floating around, but nothing was happening, so I assumed I was fine until I started coughing and had a little pop-up saying suffocation risk. I panicked and backed up, and then stopped for a second, trying to figure out what the heck to do because I was pretty sure I needed to go over there. I knew there were pipes supposedly pumping out clean air, but I wasn't sure if there would be any past the toxic gas, so I chickened out and decided to head back up to the 1st floor to see if I had possibly missed any other way I could get to the 2nd floor. Sure enough, I followed a tunnel I hadn't already on the 1st floor and started seeing signs pointing me to a different elevator, but unfortunately there was no actual elevator cart there and no way to bring it up, so I nervously accepted that I must have to run through the gas. I couldn't see any other way to the 2nd floor. So back to the cart to the 3rd floor and back through the tunnels I went. However, I wasn't just gonna go in without any prep. I figured that if this was some sort of race against the time before passing out challenge, going in with as little gear on me as possible would be the best bet so I was lighter and could run faster, so I dropped anything unnecessary, including my clothing, hoping I'd be warm enough still. Opening my profile after that made me laugh because the mental image of a naked man sprinting through a mine was a funny one, but you know what, a man's gotta do what a man's gotta do. I got back to the tunnel with the gas, took a deep breath, and then it was time. I held down on sprint and ran like I had never ran before, unintentionally holding my breath in real life as well. A countdown for suffocation appeared on screen as the edges of my vision started blurring, but I made it to the elevator and started cranking with everything in me, eyes glued to that red bar, and then at last, clean air. I breathed a sigh of relief in game and in real life. I was so scared that was gonna be the end. I took a second to collect myself at the top, and then it was back to business, although my stomach sank when I realized I'd have to do that again. And the next time would be worse because I'd already have lost a good amount of oxygen from the elevator ride. That was a problem for future me though. I found an open area and the note I was looking for in a locker with a code to the workshop doors at the prison, so at least that heart-stopping run hadn't been for nothing. I went down some stairs that looked like they basically descended into the abyss and found some gunpowder at the bottom, but nothing else. I had to nap for a few hours to regain enough energy so I'd for sure have lots of sprint for the run back, then headed back to the dreaded elevator. The second time around was definitely scarier than the first because I had already been exposed to the gas for a few seconds by the time I hit the floor, and then I had to pull the crank out as well before running as fast as I possibly could, but I made it and took another breather before continuing out of the mine. I didn't want to spend a second longer in there than I had to. I made it out and headed back down to the cave and repaired clothes and read until night. I went back to the ropes and climbed down both, but had to take the frozen river in the opposite direction now since I couldn't get back up the way I came. I crossed a tree bridge, climbed up another rope, napped for a few hours to regain some energy, and then when I woke up, the whiteout had cleared and I was right next to the prison again. I made my way back in and got to the door all excited to use the code, but it wouldn't let me enter it, and then I realized I'd need an aurora because electronics don't work without one. That was disappointing because I didn't know how many nights it could take for an aurora to appear, but all I could really do was pass time there reading and wait it out. I slept for 1 hour increments during the night so I wouldn't accidentally sleep through an aurora, but it just didn't happen that night. I spent literally the whole day reading until nighttime again. I know I could have gone out to explore, but I was a bit nervous about not being able to make it back to the prison on time in the event that there was an aurora, so I decided to spend one more day there just in case. Yet another night passed without one though, so I decided I'd go back to the creepy boiler room I found when I was first at the prison, because what better way to spend day 69 than in a hole, am I right? I found a lot of dead ends, but eventually made my way out of the tunnels and ended up in a power plant. I was in awe at this structure. Moving water is such a rarity in this game and it's always so cool to see. The area reminded me a lot of the Carter Hydro Dam back in Mystery Lake. There wasn't much in it though, as cool as it was, and it was still very early in the day, so I decided to venture out just a bit further. As long as I didn't use up all my energy and had time to get back through the tunnels to the prison before nighttime and a possible aurora, I'd be fine. I found a little workshop looking area with a partially dismantled car, and then a fully destroyed cabin above it, but nothing too exciting, so I moved on. I found a new book to read in another trailer next to a nice bridge, which led me to one of the power line towers and a great view of the river, and then when I went further on, I had an overhead view of a bear. I got a bit lost and slept in a crack between some rocks for a bit to regain some energy, then kept searching for my way back to the power plant. After a lot of running, I made it, and then I just had to navigate back through the tunnels. I got back and then returned to the routine of sleeping for an hour and then checking for an aurora over and over again until morning. Another night passed and no aurora. I was running low on water and now I had a new book, so I decided to spend the day melting and boiling snow and reading. I hated how much time I was wasting stuck in this one region, but I wanted to get into the prison so bad. I managed to again give myself food poisoning from some old peaches, so I had to take antibiotics and sleep it off for 10 hours, and then, at last, I was woken up by the telltale eerie sounds of the thing that I'd been waiting for days. The aurora had arrived. I rushed over to the keypad and entered the code, and then I was in. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I was hoping to find something that would let me into the prison. I found a milling machine, which seemed to be for tool repairing, as well as an ammunition workbench used for crafting ammo, but that was it. I was so confused. I couldn't think of any other way to get into the prison, so I had thought that surely there'd be something in there that would allow me to get in, whether it be a key or a path that led in, but nothing. In the morning, I went for my third jog around the prison perimeter, and physically facepalmed when I realized how dumb and unobservant I had been. Sure enough, there was an area I had missed in my previous 2 searches, and yes, I'm realizing how painful it's gonna be to watch the past like 5 days I wasted, but you know what? I found it eventually, and that's what counts. Go easy on me, I'm not always the brightest. I walked past a few brick buildings and fences and found a little broken up area with a rope and climbed that. And then I walked across some catwalk areas and finally found a proper entrance into the building. There were some offices with food and other supplies, and an area with a bed that I assumed were some sort of staff quarters. I went through a door that led to complete darkness, and at last was inside the actual Black Rock prison. It was just pure chaos inside, destruction everywhere I looked. I found a note tucked under the desk from who I presumed was one of the prison wardens, talking about a bunch of new inmates coming in and his trip to Timberwolf Mountain. I wondered if he had been one of the corpses I found on the summit, or if he was one of the lucky ones, whatever lucky might mean in this new harsh world. I went down more stairs and had to crawl into a vent to get into the next area, which was so cool, and then I made it into the cell block and there were a lot of bullet holes in the wall. I was honestly a bit nervous about getting lost because there were so many twists and turns and areas to check out, but it was really exciting too. I found a bloody note from someone else who had broken in search of supplies, and the body of an inmate who seemed to have died in some sort of struggle, judging by the blood all over the floor. There was a ballistic vest next to him, which would probably have been useful if I was playing in a mode where I could fall victim to wolf and bear attacks, but because I wasn't, it was too heavy to carry around and didn't provide warmth, so I left it there. And with that, it seemed I had finally explored the whole prison, so I headed back up for the last time. Except apparently I hadn't explored the whole place. There were still even more buildings I hadn't seen yet. I wasn't quite sure what the buildings were, but I assumed there were more staff quarters, what with all the beds and lockers. I napped for a bit and then climbed a rope up into one of the guard towers. There was an ominous note up there from someone who seemed to have been chased by someone else, which was freaky. After that, I went back to that staff building and spent the night there. I headed out super early to make the run all the way back through the region. I had now officially explored every single region except for one, and that one happened to be all the way west on the furthest possible side of the map from me. I didn't go there in the beginning because I honestly didn't think I'd even make it to all the regions before I hit 100 days, but clearly I was wrong. So it was going to be a very long multi-day trek all the way back, which was fine by me. It would kind of be nice to get to go back through each region and reminisce again. I harvested a freshly killed deer on the way back because I knew I'd need a lot of calories to get me through that whole trek, and stopped at a trailer I'd already been to make a fire and cook all the meat before continuing on to navigate through the cave. I got another beautiful aurora as a send-off from Black Rock, then made my way through the cave and slept at the exit until morning. I continued back down through the region, managing to sprain my ankle because I couldn't be bothered to take the rope down since I would have had to drop supplies. I ran for most of the day and then made it to Pleasant Valley. These next few days aren't going to be super interesting, basically just a lot of running and sleeping. I was making some admittedly dumb, risky maneuvers to avoid having to make 2 trips on the ropes, but it was getting the job done and I had the supplies to heal myself after, so it was worth it. I got caught in a bad whiteout blizzard and found a hunter's blind to hide out in for the night, but I actually started to get a bit scared because sleeping in my bedroll wasn't warm enough to not have my temperature go down, and I only had 1 log to burn in a fire. I made the fire and then carefully slept in hour-long intervals to make sure I wouldn't get too cold, but this storm did not want to pass. I managed to make it through the night and breathed a sigh of relief, but I had gotten a bit lost during the whiteout, so I had to regain my bearings and find my way back to a main road. I made it to the town and slept in the gas station, but got woken up by another aurora in the middle of the night. It's like the game was trying to make it up to me for all the days I waited for one in Black Rock. I was able to go on the laptop and read an email that was open, which was still such a strange feeling, and then back to sleep I went. I made it to the cave leading out of Pleasant Valley and into the winding river by early afternoon, and slept in a cave for a couple hours to regain energy. I followed the river until at last the giant Carter Hydro Dam loomed in the distance. If you watched my last 100 days attempt, you'll know that I then had to do my least favorite thing, scaling the edge of the dam, but as always, so far, I made it unscathed and crawled in through the broken window. I read for a bit, then slept until I was woken up by another aurora. What was this, the 4th night in a row? I got onto the computer next to me and found another buffer memory, a document from a past employee of the dam, it seemed. I made my way up through the rest of the dam and followed the railroad to the cabin by the lake I had spent so many days in earlier on my adventure. When I got there though, there was still so much daylight left, so I decided to keep going to the tunnel and I read and slept there. Into the Forlorn Muskeg once again. I was getting so close to the last region I had to explore. I decided to take some of my heavier clothes off so I could run faster, and I would just put them back on if it got too cold. I stopped at the train derailment on the way and found another research book, and kept running and made it to the final region, Broken Railroad, in the early morning. I found a shed and a maintenance yard yard with a creepy stenciled graffiti message on the wall reading, "They hate the light." Not unsettling at all. The inside of the maintenance shed was huge, with tons of supplies and clutter everywhere. I found some ski boots with incredible stats, but it would take away 20% of my sprint, which just wasn't worth it, so I left them. I went back to the outer shed and alternated between reading and sleeping, but I woke up to another aurora and got onto the computer next to me where there was a document detailing a patient who had been badly mauled by a wolf, then found another computer in the maintenance shed with an email that talked about getting more security out to the area. I somehow managed to glitch my book out when I dropped it, which was weird as heck, and then I went back to sleep. I set out early and followed the river until I reached a chain link fence that I was able to enter. I took a path up the mountain and found a sign welcoming me to the Mystery Lake Lodge, which came into view as I rounded the corner. The inside of the lodge was huge with tons of food, and there was a surprisingly not creepy basement. The upstairs area was somehow more menacing than the bottom floor. I imagine the lodge would have been really cozy and homely though in normal circumstances, not in, an apocalypse. I left the lodge in the morning and deployed the rope I had found over the side of the mountain so I would have a faster route back to the maintenance shed. My plan now that I had finally been to every region was to go back through Mountain Town into the Hushed River Valley, the region that I barely touched because it was pretty intimidating back at the beginning of my journey, but now I felt more confident in taking it on. I stopped by a very cool but uncomfortably high up stone bridge on my way back just to look at the view, and then began my run back along the tracks, returning to the Forlorn Muskeg at noon. I didn't have enough energy to make it all the way up to the transitional cave, but I figured I could at least make it to one of the abandoned camps in the area and stay there for the night. I read until night in the blind, and then got a view of the pretty crescent moon before going to sleep. I woke up to another frickin' aurora and watched some shooting stars as well. A beautiful peachy sunrise marked the beginning of day 80, 4/5 of the way through the challenge. I continued heading north up to the cave, and then holy shit, I wasn't paying full attention and walked out on extremely thin ice. My heart shot into my throat, but thankfully I was able to turn and run back in time. I had to take a minute to calm my heart and then continued on a lot more carefully. I napped underneath a rope I had to climb, then made my way up, but I again came so close to dying because my energy ran out just as I reached the top, which in turn froze my stamina and I just barely made it. Day 80 was not treating me well, or maybe I was just getting too careless, but oh my god, 2 heart attacks in one day was enough for me. I stopped in a cave for the night and made a fire to dry off my clothes since some of them were completely frozen and slept there. I walked through Mountain Town again and followed the road up to the cave leading to the next region. And would you look at that, at the exit I did finally find where I had dropped my rifle. Maybe it really was just a glitch that caused it to not be visible last time I had looked. Either way, I didn't have much use for it anymore as I had my bow if a weapon was really necessary. My energy was low and I remembered there wasn't any nearby shelter at the start of the region, so even though it was only midday, I spent the day and night in the cave. I woke up early and stepped out into the Hushed River Valley for the second time. I followed the river and climbed some roots and found a deserted camp with a snow shelter, a snare, and some food, and crossed the river, coming face to face with a bear again. Just a healthy little jump scare to keep me on my toes. I found one of the ice caves I hadn't gone in the first time I was there, so I decided to check it out. The ice caves were so breathtaking and I didn't mind being in them, at least when I wasn't getting lost. There was a running stream inside and a beautiful glowing alcove that led up a level. When I went deeper into the cave though, I stumbled upon what looked like a literal crime scene. At first I wasn't sure and I thought the corpse just had some red clothing on, but when I got closer I realized it was blood and this person had died with a knife stabbed into their back. Not only that though, their presumed attacker hadn't made it out either and was sat hunched over with some bloody bandages. I don't know what went on in that cave, but I was glad I hadn't been as unlucky as them. Sometimes playing this game got lonely, but maybe it was a good thing I didn't have anyone around to accidentally make enemies out of. I got out of there climbing a rope up to the next ledge and exited the other end of the cave to see what was around. I followed the river and came to some bushes I had to clear away with my axe, and it took me to a gorgeous lookout area. By the time I got back to the cave, my energy was depleted, so I decided to sleep and keep exploring the area in the morning. I continued on, climbing up and around part of the river to a pretty lookout called the Pensive Vista, but there really wasn't much else around other than nice views. I went further north and spotted my first moose on a lake. They're so majestic and I would be terrified to get on the wrong side of one, but they're cool to watch from a distance. I went into a cave behind a waterfall and found another corpse with a gun that yet again I wouldn't be needing. It's almost like I had unintentionally played a pacifist run so far. I found a second cured wolf pelt in the cave, which was awesome, but if I wanted to craft the overpowered wolfskin coat, I might have to put an end to the aforementioned unintentional pacifist run and also find enough bravery in me to attack a wolf. Honestly, it was something I'd like to do before the end of this run, but my guilt over killing in-game animals is embarrassing. I promise I'll get over it, eventually. If I want to achieve this before the end though, I need to give myself at least 7 days for the pelts to cure, and I did not want to attempt to take down a wolf with my bow, so I figured it would be worth beginning the journey back down to the cave I entered the region through to retrieve my rifle, and then maybe try to take down 2 wolves in Mountain Town so I'm closer to the workbench I need to use to craft the coat. So that was the plan, adventure back south. I had to climb down a rope and clear some shrubs, then I read and slept under a little overhang for the night. I woke up early in the morning to another freezing blizzard, which was really not ideal, but I was so glad I had kept so much firewood on me for a situation like this because otherwise I'd be pretty screwed. I got a fire started and melted some snow while I slept next to it until the storm passed, then continued on my way, descending down another rope. In the distance I spotted an actual rainbow, so of course I had to walk over and get a closer look. It was just doing its own thing, looking all magical next to the falls, and it was such a pretty sight. I climbed up another rope, slept under another overhang for a bit to regain some energy, and then finally made it back to the cave. I grabbed my rifle and ammo and made my way back through the cave to Mountain Town, crashing at the trailer for the night after a jaw-dropping sunset. I got up at the crack of dawn and got my rifle ready and loaded, trying to ignore my pre-kill guilt, and then made my way back down to the town. I really had no idea what I was doing, but I didn't want to fire off any practice shots and waste ammo, so I'd have to figure it out as I went. It was kind of funny how as soon as I was actively looking for them for the first time in 85 days, no wolves wanted to show themselves. It made me feel even worse, honestly, but I just had to keep reminding myself it's just a game. I waited very patiently and quietly for a while near the farm, but even with the temptation of deer, no wolves came out, so I decided to try the area next to the gas station. It was just weird how eerily quiet it was. No howling or barking, no signs of movement. It's really like they somehow knew. To make things worse, it seemed like a whiteout was setting in, which sure would make it harder for the wolves to get spooked by me, but it would also make it harder for me to find them. I at last finally heard the faintest howl in the direction I had just come from and turned back around, but this wolf seemed to have spidey senses with how far off it noticed me. That was okay though, I could be patient. At one point, a second wolf joined the first one, and the second got so close that I just impulsively fired because I felt like at any moment it would notice me, and I missed. Damn it. I crept up to the one on the log pile and just went for it, firing 2 shots, and I got it, but what the hell? I felt so bad, but I couldn't stop laughing at the position it died in. Oh my god, Mans was straight up levitating. His soul truly left his body. I tried my best to stop giggling and quartered the carcass, ignoring the guilt. I'd finally done it, 85 days in. I didn't feel good about it, but I was proud of myself for finally sucking it up and just doing it. 1 down, 1 more to go. I got really close to the second, but didn't shoot in time, so I followed it for a little bit and waited for it to cross in front of me. And really, this one was sorta natural selection. I wasn't even hidden, it just walked straight across the open path I was crouched in, so it was an easy shot. That didn't lessen the guilt though, but I got it over with and quartered its carcass as well. My bag was now at 69 kilograms of weight, and I could barely walk, so I inched my way slowly to the gas station where I spent the night harvesting and cooking the meat. I was glad to have such a plentiful food source from the wolves, since I'd have to spend a week letting the pelts cure and would need a food source to live off of in the meantime. I chowed down on some freshly cooked wolf meat, which is a very strange sentence, and then went to sleep off my guilt. Except Aurora had other plans, and I woke up to quickly check the computer, finding a new email that spoke about medical supplies running low in the town due to loss of contact, and then went back to sleep. I spent the day inside the gas station, reading and eating instead of going straight to the farmhouse because the more food weight I could eat before having to drag all the hides over there, the better. In the morning, it was finally time to make the run back to the farmhouse with all the supplies. I got there by late morning and dropped everything, then contemplated what to do. I didn't want to leave the whole region because there wasn't much else for me to do at the moment elsewhere. There was one more area in this region I didn't think I had explored yet that could occupy me for a couple days, so I figured why not. I walked up to the town again, then went up to the mountain behind it until I reached the radio tower for a nice view of the town. I followed the path past it to a cave with a bit of supplies in it, then went further past a frozen pond until I rounded the corner and a small crashed plane came into view. There was wreckage scattered everywhere as well as a lot of materials I could use, and it looked like a terrifying crash to be in. I climbed down 3 more ledges and found the rest of the wreck, along with more supplies and a cave with some animal skeletons inside, which wasn't super comforting, but I'd be staying there for the night whether I liked it or not. I read until dark and then slept. I had to retrace my steps all the way back to the farmhouse the next day, and when I got back, my wolf pelts were 41% cured. Not bad. I spent the rest of the day reading and most of the next 2 days as well. Nothing really interesting. I got bored of being inside and passing time, and aside from MREs, I was running a little bit low on food, so I decided to go and give my bow a whirl since I hadn't used it yet. The usual herd of deer weren't around, so I watched a pretty sunrise, really trying to take in my last few days in this run. When I did find the deer though, oh man did I struggle. Apparently there was something I was worse at than using a gun. I scared one off so bad though that a wolf actually went after it and did the job for me though, so you win some, you lose some. I harvested the carcass and went back to the farmhouse to cook the meat, and I had so much room on the stove for cooking, which was awesome and cut down my cooking time by so much. I was able to melt some snow down into more water as well, and then called it a day. I went to go put my 2 snares out in the morning just for something else to do, and then I could hang out near them while passing time to see if I caught anything. The weather wasn't great though, so I waited in the house for a couple hours for it to get clearer out, then walked out and watched the rabbits for a bit and followed their cute little paw prints to figure out where to set the snares down. I really need to get over my video game hunting related guilt. I crouched behind a stump for the entire day and moved the snares a couple times, but these rabbits were too smart for me, and I went back to the farmhouse empty-handed in the evening. When I woke up in the morning, the wolf pelts were 96% cured. So close. I ran to check the snares just to pass that last tiny bit of time. They hadn't fallen for the traps yet, but their footsteps were just barely to the side of one of them, so I adjusted the position once more and then waited. I sat there for a whole other full day, but nothing. I even tried facing the other way in case it wouldn't work if I was watching, but still no success. Oh well, I went back to the cabin and lo and behold, the wolf pelts had cured. I went to sleep so excited to start crafting in the morning. A beautiful sunrise welcomed me as I headed out to the barn early in the morning, getting getting settled at the workbench. The coat would take me 25 full hours to craft, so it would take me 2 days to get it done, but I was very ready. I worked in 5-hour intervals and got 12 hours of crafting done by the time night fell and a nasty blizzard hit. I almost couldn't find my way back to the house with how low the visibility was, but I made it. I realized I completely forgot about my snares and left them out for more than a day in a storm no less, so I went to go retrieve them, fully expecting them to be broken. But I was pleasantly surprised when I found them not only intact, but with 2 rabbits in them. I ran back to the house to harvest them and let the pelts cure on the floor, then went back to the barn to work on the coat some more. I got another 9 hours of work done, then went back inside at night to start a fire and cook the rabbit meat and melt some more snow before going to sleep. I ran to check the snares again first thing in the morning, and while one was ruined this time, the other had another rabbit in it. I reset the remaining snare before running back to the barn to harvest the carcass and continue working on the coat. I only had 4 hours left, and I knocked them out quickly, and then at last I had finished crafting my wolfskin coat, a sign of a true survivor and solid protection against all the elements. It's funny because it honestly wasn't much better than the expedition parkas I had on, but it looked way cooler, and that's what counted. I stood out in the wind to test it, and it kept me at a toasty 20 degrees, although the true test would be standing in an actual blizzard. I went to check the snare again, but it was still empty, so back to the house for the night it was. Day 97. Wow, that feels crazy. Today I had achieved all my main goals, and I wasn't really sure what else to do without starting another big task with only a few days to go, and then I decided I wanted to make this challenge come full circle and go back to the beginning, to Bleak Inlet. It's where I died in my first attempt and where I started in this one, so why not end it there as well? I would be cutting it close, trying to make it there before the last day, but if I was smart about it, I could make it. So I started out on my very last adventure, stepping out into one of the worst whiteouts yet. I ran through town for the last time, past the gas station, up to the picnic area, down one rope and up another, and then entered the cave, following it until I made it back to Mystery Lake. I ran to the railroad and then spent the night in the train tunnel. I exited the tunnel and entered Forlorn Muskeg, and oh man was the weather scary, so I decided to hide out in the tunnel for a bit longer until it passed. It was still pretty cold a couple hours later, but I didn't have time to waste, so I kept moving. I again got too comfortable because as I was mindlessly crossing some ice that seemed relatively shallow, it started to crack under my feet again, and I am so lucky I managed to back up in time. I had to take another breather before continuing on a lot more carefully than before, or at least that's what I told myself, until literally less than a minute later I was trying to circle carefully around the edge of the water, and I thought surely the ice isn't gonna break even though it's giving me the warning because I'm so close to the edge, and then it fucking broke and my screen went black. My heart leapt into my mouth and I sat there in disbelief, feeling my pulse in my ears, willing the game to go easy on me and let me survive this. A few painful seconds later, I resurfaced and let out the biggest exhale of my life. That was way too close and way too lucky, and oh my god, that could have been it. I could have genuinely just actually died 2 days away from finishing the challenge. Although to be fair, I wasn't out of the woods yet, not even close, because now I had hypothermia and all my clothes were frozen. I was so lucky I had decided to take a couple clothing items off to make running faster, because those were at least dry and I was able to put them on while having to take off all the other soaked frozen ones. After that, I only had one thing on my mind, and that was getting the hell out of the cold open air and into the cave. I ran for my life, literally, and breathed a sigh of relief once I was in. Then I had to make a fire to dry off my clothes, because I wasn't going to be able to travel safely in Bleak Inlet with half my clothes off. I grabbed some coal as I ran through the cave, and once I made a fire next to the exit, I added coal to it to make it hotter so I'd dry off faster, and spent the night in the cave. Day 99, oh my god. The second to last day, I couldn't even comprehend that. I stepped out of the cave into Bleak Inlet, and it was another complete whiteout. It was hard enough to navigate in this region as it is, so I wasn't going to risk trying that half blind, and spent a couple hours waiting for it to pass before continuing on. Apparently, I don't learn from my mistakes, because I ran over ice and got the thin ice warning 2 more times while trying to navigate around the delta, but hey, I didn't fall in again. The cannery I started in at last came into view, and walking back through that fence was such a nostalgic feeling. I walked through all the buildings again one last time, checking to see if I missed anything, then rested for a bit so I'd have the energy to watch my very last sunset. I walked out to the furthest part of the dock and then sat there, just watching the sun go down, hoping the sky would stay clear. It did, and I watched one of the most stunning sunsets, reminiscing on the many days I had spent in this beautiful world until it was time to say goodnight to the moon and sleep my very last night away. I woke up in the middle of the night though to another aurora, and it felt like the world's way of saying goodbye. A beautiful light show in the sky as a last send-off. Day 100. Damn. I'm honestly in shock that I managed to make it this far. I watched a cold but beautiful sunrise for the last time and took in all the feelings. I was so relieved, obviously, because spending like 8 hours in a game for weeks on end inevitably gets tiring sometimes. I was surprised that I actually made it to day 100, both in terms of me not being an idiot and dying before I got there, and in terms of me not giving up before I made it. I was happy with myself for sticking through it because this was by no means a short, simple project, even if the game mode itself was relatively easy. I spent basically the whole last month of 2021 filming this, and then finished filming on the first day of 2022, so it felt like a satisfying way to wrap up the year for me. I actually hit 10,000 views on my first 100 days attempt while filming this one, which is just mind-blowing to me. And not only that, but while writing the script and recording it, I hit 20,000. I don't know what's happening because I honestly didn't expect much interest in these videos since The Long Dark isn't a super well-known game in comparison to others. I've just been enjoying filming these and hoped a few people would have fun watching them as well, so to have gotten so many kind comments and so much support has been really surprising but so cool. So thank you, seriously. I'm so excited to make more of these videos. My next one will hopefully be an attempt at 100 days in The Long Dark's near impossible game mode, Interloper, which I'm already pretty far into filming, and I'm hoping to try this challenge out in lots of other games too so I don't burn myself out in this one. Anyway, all that aside, I hope you enjoyed this video. I had a lot of fun making it, and it's so refreshing to feel so much motivation for creating again. If you have any other suggestions for games you'd like to see me try to spend 100 days in, or if you have any ideas for other challenges to try in The Long Dark, feel free to drop them below, and if you're looking for more content, my Twitch and other links are in the description. Until next time, have a great day, and I will see you in my next video.